The early morning light filters into the quiet kitchen. Grace sits alone at a table set for two, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. Across from her is the place setting she had prepared for her husband Mark the night before, a silent testament to her hopeful wait. Grace's day begins in silence, her heart holding on to hope. Last night, she had prepared everything just as Mark likes it, convinced that her patience and loyalty would bring him home on time. But as dawn breaks, she faces an empty chair and a familiar ache. Her gaze drifts to her phone for the 100th time, where a single text from Mark reads, "Busy, don't wait up." She studies it, willing herself to believe he just had a long day at work and decided to stay in the city overnight. But her eyes betray a lingering sadness. The tension between them had stretched on for weeks. As Grace looks down at her hands on the table, her fingers absently tracing the swirls and curves of the wood grain, her mind begins to drift as she recalls the past few weeks, how Mark was distant, his absence lasting longer each time. She tries to remember if there was a moment, a single action that caused the silent treatment, this nagging, familiar feeling that she was in one of his timeouts. "I must have done something to displease him, but what did I do this time?" Grace muses. Grace's mind races, feverishly sifting through fragments of recent memories, searching for the slightest misstep, some small, unnoticed moment that might have ignited this punishing silence. Her thoughts fluttered like delicate butterflies, skimming the edges of her mind, until they paused, stopping on a tiny incident from 2 weeks earlier. She'd made a simple suggestion, a quiet hope to bring a touch of warmth into their home. But to Mark, it landed differently, rippling through him as something far more disruptive. On that fateful evening, Grace and Mark were together in the den. When Grace turned to Mark, then hesitated for a second before speaking, her tone light and hopeful. "I thought maybe I'd rearrange the bookshelves and bring in a few new cushions. It might make the room feel a little more cozy, freshen the place up a bit, don't you think?" Mark's face hardens immediately, his jaw tightening. He glances around the room as though Grace had suggested something absurd. "This is my home, Grace. I don't need you moving things around or buying new cushions," Mark snaps. Grace's face falls, her hopeful expression shifting to one of quiet apology as she nods silently. Avoiding his gaze, she quickly focuses her attention back at something they were watching on the television that Mark chose for them to watch. She realizes now that that was the moment, how her innocent suggestion was all it took to trigger Mark's rage. In that split second, Mark's control over his space, his home, had been questioned. To Grace, it felt like a minor misstep. To Mark, it was a breach of control, one that could not go unpunished. Back in present, we find Grace still sitting at the kitchen table, her expression soft and distant as she snaps back to reality. She looks around the kitchen, taking in the carefully arranged details, every item placed exactly as Mark prefers, and puts his table setting, his wine glass and favourite knife and fork back in their place. "I should have known. He likes things a certain way," muses Grace. "I will not make that suggestion again," she promises herself. Pushing her feelings aside, Grace moves into her morning routine with quiet resolve. She goes over to Mark's walk-in wardrobe and picks out one of Mark's pristine white work shirts with care, ironing the collar, cuff and fold with precision, then sets out breakfast as if performing a regimented ritual. Every detail is tailored to his exacting preferences. His coffee poured just so, his toast crisped to the precise shade he prefers, and the crusts cut off. She had no idea if he was coming home for breakfast, but she knew better than not to have everything ready, just in case. Every morning, Grace begins with the same steps, each one filled with careful attention. She's learned over the years that Mark's standards are unyielding, that any attempt to change things or add her own touches only stirs disapproval. She tells herself that Christian love means understanding his needs, keeping the peace. She arranges his favorite items on the table, takes a step back, and allows herself a small, hopeful smile. Today, maybe he'll notice. If I can just get it right, he'll see how much I care, and maybe, just maybe, start talking to me again. Grace moves from room to room, her eyes scanning every corner, adjusting small details to ensure that everything is in order. She straightens pillows on the couch, dusts the shelves, and places his books neatly on the coffee table. She glances around, assessing the room as if through his eyes, making sure there's nothing that could draw a frown. Grace's life has become a series of invisible tasks, each one a quiet offering of her love and loyalty. She remembers every comment, every preference, committing them to memory as though they're sacred truths. She tells herself that if she can meet every expectation, he'll finally be content. She takes a step back, looking at her work with a faint sense of pride. For a brief moment, she lets herself hope that he'll come home and see her efforts, that he'll finally appreciate everything she does. Early that same morning, Mark arrives home unexpectedly, his expression cold and indifferent. Grace's face lights up, a hopeful smile spreading across her lips as she steps forward to greet him. But he walks past her, towards the kitchen table, and sits down, glancing disapprovingly at the breakfast she'd prepared for him, his mouth twisting in a slight frown. "The eggs are runny and the toast is burnt. Can't you get it right, Grace?" Mark snorts. Grace's smile falters, a flicker of pain in her eyes before she quickly forces a smile, nodding as she gathers up the plate. Her hands shake a little, but she hides her disappointment, telling herself he's just trying to help her do better. She quickly prepares a second breakfast for Mark, even though the first one was made exactly the way he likes it. To Grace, his words feel like guidance, a gentle reminder that she still has work to do. She convinces herself that his disappointment is a sign of his high standards, a reflection of his care for her. She tells herself that if he didn't care, he wouldn't say anything at all. As Mark finishes his last sip of coffee and stands, heading upstairs for a shower, Grace quietly clears the table, placing the dishes in the dishwasher. Her voice is barely a whisper, repeating a soft mantra to herself as she moves. "Next time, I'll get it right. Next time, I'll get it right. Next time, I'll get it right." Grace spends the morning attending to each task with quiet precision, replaying ways again and again how she can improve. She re-irons Mark's shirt, knowing that even the slightest wrinkle or crease could invite his silent disapproval. She's learned that perfection is her only safeguard. After straightening up his polished shoes for the second time and removing a small piece of lint from his suit jacket, she steps back and watches as he picks up his briefcase, keys and phone and leaves without a word. Her thoughts cycle endlessly, her mind a quiet storm of self-doubt and self-correction. She believes that if she's careful enough, thoughtful enough, she'll finally reach the level he expects. She tells herself that true love is a constant state of improvement. She catches her reflection in the mirror, noticing the faint lines on her face, the quiet weariness in her eyes. She pauses, pressing her fingers lightly to her cheek, as though searching for the person she once was. Then, with a small, forced smile, she pushes her thoughts away. "He works so hard. The least I can do is make things perfect for him," Grace whispers to herself. As evening approaches, Grace finishes setting the dinner table with care, arranging each item precisely. Mark arrives home, washes his hands in the kitchen sink, and compliments her choice of dinner, before sitting at the dining table, his voice neutral, but to Grace it's a moment of triumph. Her face lights up, the hope in her eyes unmistakable. To Grace, these brief moments of approval feel like the rewards she's been working toward. She takes these rare compliments as signs of progress, convinced that her devotion is finally making a difference. She carries the warmth of his words with her for the rest of the evening, her mind buzzing with plans for the next day. She holds on to the memory, replaying it in her mind, as though it's a precious keepsake. As night falls, Grace waits for Mark in the den, her heart buoyed by the hope that he might notice her efforts. But Mark barely glances her way as he enters, making an offhand remark about the room feeling stuffy before heading upstairs to his home office. Grace's face falls, her earlier hope dissolving into a quiet ache. In an instant, her hope fades, replaced by the familiar weight of disappointment. But instead of questioning him, she questions herself, wondering what she could have done differently, convinced that she is at fault. She quickly adjusts the thermostat, glancing around the room with a look of determination, already planning the small changes she can make tomorrow to avoid another disappointment. I should have known. I'll do better next time. As the night deepens, Grace remains alone in the den, her gaze locked on Mark's empty chair. Her mind replays the day in vivid detail, the small triumph, the steady stream of disappointments, as she softly reminds herself that this is what true Christian marriage looks like. Her days have become a delicate balance of anticipation and self-sacrifice. Each moment of disappointment convinces her to give more, to adjust and adapt. She's come to believe that her happiness is secondary, that real love means putting his wants and desires above her own, without question. Exhausted now, Grace makes her way upstairs to their bedroom. As she walks into the hallway and towards the stairs, she glances at her reflection in the mirror, seeing the faint lines of worry on her face, the quiet resolve in her eyes and the forced smile she must always wear in front of Mark, and whispers to herself, as though trying to comfort her own heart. This is love. It has to be. Grace's story is a powerful reminder of the invisible sacrifices that love sometimes demands, and the toll it takes on the heart. But as she questions her role, the delicate line between devotion and self-denial begins to blur. Join us in the next episode as we continue to uncover the hidden truths behind Grace's loyalty to Mark and the affect this has on her life. If Grace's journey resonates with you, remember that love should never come at the cost of your peace. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our waitlist in the description for resources on reclaiming your strength, faith, and self-worth. See you in the next video.